Hello and welcome to Rights and Recourse, a program that educates you about your rights and recourse to those violated. My name is Marcel. The Boko Haram abduction of 234 schoolgirls has brought the issue of human trafficking into sharp focus in Africa. Human trafficking is a trade in humans, most commonly for the purposes of sexual slavery, forced labor or commercial sexual exploitation for the trafficker or for others, or for the extraction of organ tissues, including surrogacy and ovule removal, or for providing a spouse in the context of forced marriages. Human trafficking is a trade in people and does not necessarily involve the movement of the person from one place to another. This is Rights and Recourse, and today we speak human trafficking in South Africa and beyond. To discuss this topic are Mr. Luvuyo Mfaku, Head of Trafficking in Persons at the National Prosecuting Authority, Mr. Marcel from Unisa's Department of Police Practice, Forensic and Criminal Investigation Science. At our Durban studios, Ms. Thora, Mansfield, Director and Founder of Open Doors Organization, and at our Bloemfontein studios, Professor Beatri Kruger, Criminal and Medical Law. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Let me start by asking a broad question. Is there a difference between human trafficking and human smuggling?
I'll take that. There is a difference, Mr. Mateza. With human smuggling, the person to be smuggled enters in some kind of agreement with the smuggler that I want to cross a border to South Africa. There's a fee that is negotiated. Once the person crosses the border into South Africa, then the relationship between the smuggler and the smuggled comes to an end. With trafficking in persons, there's that element of deception. The victim is not aware that he's being trafficked to be exploited. There's deception and some form of misrepresentation, and at the end, exploitation.
In other words, what is happening on our borders in Limpopo could be smuggling rather than trafficking.
Of course, if you should also remember that if a person is smuggled through the borders into South Africa, and then his right or her right of movement are curtailed and is subjected to some exploitation, then that smuggling turns into trafficking.
So what is the scope of human trafficking in South Africa and internationally?
Well, Dumile, currently, really, that's one of the contentious issues in research because, there's quite a number of inflated statistics going around. We often hear this amount of 27 million slaves, being trafficked internationally. I think that number grew to something like 32 or 33 million slaves internationally. But part of the problem with statistics and estimating the extent of the problem really is because of the subversive nature of the problem. I mean, how do you quantify it if some victims themselves don't even know that there are problems, or that they are in fact a victim of human trafficking? The fact is, it's a reality. It happens. Cases are being reported, and especially with increasing awareness, that is a great thing at the moment. More and more people come forward, and more and more you get role players who identify a case as a case of trafficking, but basically a lot of anecdotal research, anecdotal statistics going around, which makes it difficult.
Professor Beatri Kruger in Bloemfontein, you've done extensive research on this part. Probably you can give us whatever figures you have picked up. Professor Kruger?
Yes. The research that's been done on what is the extent of the problem is very problematic, and that is not a problem only in South Africa, it is worldwide. So I agree with Marcel in the sense that we get many cases that come to the fore. We cannot count the amount of convictions because of the fact that it's so absolutely difficult to get a conviction, seeing that victims are traumatized most of the time, that they are not able or willing to testify against their traffickers, and that makes it so very difficult to get an accurate amount of trafficking cases. But the thing is, one trafficking case is one too many. And the few that we have in each part of Africa, South Africa came across, just shows us that the problem is a reality in small places, in bigger towns. It's here, and we have to do something about it.
Luvuyo,
I think I'd like to maybe agree with you there, both Marcel and Beatri. I think that we're not realizing just the extent. And I think with the Trafficking in Persons Bill, I run a shelter for abused women and children, and are registered as a victim, as a shelter for victims of human trafficking. I know last year we had 17 victims, and I know that there's an increase coming in this year as well. So I think that absolutely, and I agree with Beatri, that just one is one too many. And we should be looking more not only at the statistics, which seems to be the main thing. Everybody talks about statistics, but nobody's looking about the human rights issue and the violation of these women mentally and psychologically.
how would I recognize a victim if there's a victim of this kind of crime? How is that recognized?
Mr. Mateza, they've indicated that trafficking in persons is organized in nature. So it's they commit it in a clandestine fashion. Where there are some indicators where we can actually identify a victim of trafficking. For instance, if someone appears to be, his or her movement are being controlled and they seem to be disorientated, there are visible scars, and that they do not speak any local language, then that is, those are indicators that this person might be a trafficked victim.
What is the general purpose? Probably I'll be asking you, Thora. What the people who come to you to your shelter, what do they say? What have been brought? What have they've been brought to South Africa for?
Well, many come legally because they believe that they are coming to do sex work, and when they get here, they are then they tricked, they transported, and they trapped. And when they get here, they find that they are actually trapped. And then for them, while they came to do sex work, they are now forced into brothels or into brothels or places like that, where they then become victims of trafficking. And that's where the danger comes in, because as soon as they arrive, their passports are taken away, which is a sheer indication of why of a victim.
If you'd like to join us on today's discussion, please call us on 011 714 6919 or 18, or tweet us at Rights Recourse. We'll be back after the break. Welcome back. If you'd like to join us and be part of the discussion, please call us on 714-6918 or 6919, or tweet us at Rights Recourse. A lot has been said about the Boko Haram story in Nigeria, but according to statistics, in Nigeria alone, in 2 million people trafficked a year around the world, Nigeria a year, 1,180 girls are trafficked a year. Is it surprising?
Well, from my side, no, definitely not. I mean, we know that in terms of Nigerian females, they usually go into transit in the UK and they end up in Italy, France, a lot of European countries. So definitely not a surprise, no.
Is this migration, this trafficking, not forced by the fact that a number of people want to leave Africa and go to big lights, big cities in Europe and in South Africa for that matter?
You've captured it correctly, Mr. Matez. That traffickers, they thrive on the fact that people are vulnerable and they exploit their socio-economic conditions. Hence, they come with all these offers that I'm taking you abroad. You're gonna, live, some great, lifestyle. And people want to put food on the table. They want to support their families. Then they fall for those, false pretenses.
Probably at this stage, let's go and listen to what anti-trafficking activists had to say about human trafficking.
I think more awareness and then harsher punishments, definitely harsher punishments on these perpetrators, because in the end, you know, they're doing this to our children. And our children are the future, and our children are innocent, and therefore the government and the law must really step up, and harsher punishments, definitely.
And it's something awful. If you can check, like we've got 2 borders that are surrounding us here. Every day they are trafficking children to South Africa just to use them sexually. Some of them they are used to do labor.
Well, we have a call on the line, Mr. Khoza from Pretoria. Mr. Khoza, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse. We seem to have lost Mr. Khoza there. You heard what some of those guys are saying in the clip. What is the role of law enforcement to enhance their investigative skills regarding human trafficking?
Mr. Matthias, as you might recall that since our government ratified the Palermo Protocol in 2004, we have embarked on a number of counter-trafficking initiatives through the Triletsani project. Triletsani in Venda, meaning protect.
I'm happy you were the only one who have to pronounce that term. I came across it and I said, I'm going to forget this term.
Within that project, we focused on the legislative development. That is what is culminated to this current Trafficking in Persons Act. We focused on capacity building, that the training of frontline officers in our ports of entry, the police, your social workers, and your NPA prosecutors and investigators from SABC. That program is still continuing. We further focused on developing counter-trafficking task teams. We've got task teams in Gauteng, in the Western Cape, in KZN. Those are intersectoral. All the criminal justice role players are involved within those task teams. The responsibility of those task teams is to embark on awareness-raising campaigns, educate the public so that we have an informed society. If people are informed about this sketch, then we would actually minimize the effect of trafficking in persons.
Professor Kruger, how prevalent is this kind of thing in South Africa, internally in South Africa? Is it only people from overseas, or do we have trafficking that takes place internally, from province to province?
Yes, I think the big problem is that we still have is that we need more research. So at this stage, we still have the IOM research, which was for a couple of years ago, which specifically focuses on the internal trafficking. And we know that is alive and well, where people are trafficked from mostly more rural areas like Brandfort to Johannesburg or Cape Town. So it's definitely part of the trafficking scenario. And that is what makes trafficking so immensely difficult to grasp and understand, because of the fact that you can get in-country trafficking, you can get cross-border trafficking. There's many areas of trafficking, exploitation. Any type of exploitation will actually fall within a definition of human trafficking. So that is important for us to be on the lookout for that. And what I wanted to stress when Thora identified victims of trafficking, the things that we are looking for is what Unisa has done now with Marcel's project, Tereletso, where an expert from the UK, Andy Desmond, came and shared with us his knowledge on the use of juju, witchcraft, in psychologically controlling the victims that were trafficked from Nigeria to other parts of the world. So from now on, we can learn from that and look specifically at what types of indications are there to look for that type of trafficking. And one of the very interesting matters was the incisions that were made on the back, all over the body of the victim, but on the back of the victim at the shoulder blade, which was an indication that it couldn't be done by the victim themselves, where soot was then rubbed into those incisions, believing then that the dead spirits, as they call them, will then control them, and the oath that they took is then that they wouldn't that they would obey at all times, that they wouldn't report it to the police, and that makes it so difficult. And I think it's important for us and the public to understand that victims are most often being controlled by psychological methods.
Let's hear from Thora. Let's hear from Thora down in Durban as to where do the people who come and knock on the door come from?
Well, they wouldn't be coming to knock on the door. We have to work through a process, and the clients that are sent to us obviously come from the state, from the NPA or from the soccer unit. And so after a raid has been done, we would be informed, and then the clients would be sent to us. But once again, we keep on talking them about as victims. But for me, I just feel we are not talking enough about them as being people. They are daughters, they're mothers, they're children. So we concentrate so much about stats and the number of stats. It's very seldom that I hear anybody looking at, and even this Buru problem that's just been happening now, the psychological effect on a victim is so enormous. They're bodily, mentally, physically, spiritually, they are so damaged. And we need to start thinking and talking about that as well when we start talking about stats.
Marcel, you want to say
I just want to come in with an important point, just to echo what both Thora and Beatri have been speaking about. It's the issue of vulnerability. We often think that, this cannot happen to me, it won't happen to my daughter. But I mean, all of us can be vulnerable. And I think the other issue is the whole thing about push and pull factors, which kind of drives this whole process of human trafficking. Push factors, those things that pushes potential victims away from a community, and pull factors, those factors that pulls them to a specific location like Joburg and the bright lights of the city. I think it's important for us to understand those dynamics and to understand that vulnerability is a common denominator in all of the situations where there are victims. So,
what is this project
Marcel,
you're working on? So who wants to come in? I think it's Professor Kruger.
Sorry, can I just, okay.
No, go ahead.
No, I think Thora, it was you that wanted to come in.
Yes. Well, we keep talk about vulnerability, but I'd also like to say we haven't really touched on the fact we're talking about poverty, but then we're looking at young people going overseas, going on holiday, being au pairs over there, the opportunity for travel, the opportunity for becoming models. And one client that we had was actually taken over there as an ambassador. So, we haven't even looked at that. So we looked at poverty as one of the prime factors, but there are other factors as well that may not only affect people that are or the vulnerable in terms of poverty, but in other areas as well.
Well, Luvuyo, one of the other things, there's a case, without mentioning the details of the case that is going on in Durban, apparently, on this very issue.
Yes, we've got. I mean, this trial in Durban is ongoing. It's a trafficking in persons matter. We cannot actually get into the merits until it's concluded.
No, we cannot get to the merits. Yeah. But let me find this out. Beatri in Bloemfontein. It is said in South Africa, it is estimated that 30,000 children are being prosecuted, and half of those kids, or most of them, come from provinces such as the Eastern Cape, Limpopo, and Mpumalanga. Is that such a big number of children being trafficked?
I think what we emphasized earlier on is that research is not adequate at this stage. So the amount of 30,000 has been mentioned, but prostitution is not exactly the same. Child prostitution is not necessarily child trafficking. So the definition of trafficking is important to clarify that, being the action part, which consists of recruiting or transporting or harboring a victim, and that is being done by means of broadly either force or coercion or by deception. And the main purpose remains for exploitation. So if those elements are not present, it can be prostitution but not necessarily human trafficking. And I think that makes it difficult for us because we don't have enough research on field work about that. But what we do have is cases that's already been finalized, as the first case, State versus Dos Santos, where a lady trafficked 3 girls from Mozambique, minor girls, to South Africa for sexual exploitation, and she was sentenced to a life imprisonment.
We'll follow up on that case, Beatri.
Beatri,
we'll follow up on that case when we come back. We just have to go and do some shopping. If you'd like to join us to today's program, please call us on 714-6919 or tweet us on Rights Recourse. We'll be back after the break. Welcome back, and let's go back to something I'm very particular. I want to ask this particularly. Over the last 20 years, we've seen a stream of girls from Eastern European countries coming to South Africa, and according to some research, is the owners of these places where these girls are trafficked to, come and they run profitable businesses. They make huge sums of money, and there's very minimal prosecution.
Mr. Mateza, we've got the so-called strip joints, which are legitimately established. What they put forward is that there is no engagement whatsoever sexually. They tease their patrons. It ends there.
I like the word tease.
They whet their appetite to some extent. Now, with those joints, it's not easy to unearth trafficking in persons. Hence, as the criminal justice cluster, we said the investigation has to be intelligence driven. You need to have your undercover agents in those particular places where they can actually unearth the issue of prostitution as well as trafficking.
The issues for me, sorry, Marcel, quickly, but you can answer that together with this one. We have a plethora of laws. We've got the Children's Act, with the Criminal Law, Sexual Offences and Related Matters Act. We've got another the whole of the Criminal Procedure Act. Can't we deal with these things?
The issue with the sexual offences, Section 71, those are transitional arrangements, because we were still busy deliberating on the establishment, on the enactment of this current act. We had to have some transitional measures.
The Trafficking Act.
Yes. We had to have some transitional measures to ensure that traffickers do not just traffic for sexual exploitation with impunity. So that section deals specifically with trafficking for sexual exploitation. Hence, it doesn't actually address holistically the whole problem of trafficking in persons. Hence, we've got a new legislation. The Children's Act, Chapter 18, specifically deals with trafficking in persons in respect of children. There are limitations there. Now, with this new legislation, we have consolidated all the fragmented legislative framework into one piece of legislation that specifically addresses the whole issue of trafficking in persons.
Marcel, you wanted to say something, and probably include in your answer this issue Beatri was talking about, this juju thing.
Okay, well, what I wanted to, just on the previous question, just, alluding to the fact that a lot of these business owners just proceed with a crime, with impunity. But I think it's well documented, well researched that human trafficking is one of the most complex crimes to investigate. And also just echo what Luvuyo just mentioned, is that we need intelligence-driven investigations. A lot of the investigations that are initiated are reactive, meaning that we often rely on victims, on their evidence, and we understand, and without considering the fact, the trauma and the background that goes along with that. So what we need is corroborative, independent testimony which corroborate victims' testimony, and that requires a multidisciplinary response. Just on the issue of juju, definitely, I think the speaker came out with our Project Chireletsu seminar, and just kind of filled the gap on a lot of things that didn't always make sense to us. You know, why do victims submit a statement and then they don't want to go to court? Or why do they go to an identification parade and they initially pointed out the suspect, but when it comes to pointing out an ID parade, it cannot be done. So it really goes into the supernatural realm, and I mean, we are all called and to be open to this new message. And I think that's where Beatri just hit the nail on the head. You know, more research is needed on this, and this is definitely what we're busy engaging with as we speak. Yeah.
But surely, Beatri, you are a professor at the University of the Free State, or you are attached to a university. Professors do the research.
Yes.
You and Marcel should do the research.
We are doing research. It's just that we also have other jobs as well to do. So I think the capacity is often difficult, but the research should be ongoing, because as we go along, we understand better. And as we understand more things, it opens up more areas for research. So we can really have a huge team only doing research, and that's being done all over the world. But we are still in our baby shoes, and we are still having to climb a lot of mountains to really understand the various types of trafficking and what is behind that, and how to then prosecute them more successfully than we are doing worldwide at the moment.
We are told that...
that is the thing about...
We are told that, my apologies, Beatri, we are told that huge major sporting events like the World Cup, the Olympic Games, they draw all of these people to come to a place, and that's where trafficking takes place.
Well, yeah, there's definitely been a lot of reports, of that nature prior to our World Cup in 2010. But there's also been conflicting research and conflicting findings. Whilst I've been with the Hawks up until 2011, and there we found that a lot of syndicates, they start renting.
Wait a moment, are you saying you're working for the Hawks?
Well, prior to Unisa, this was the work that I did.
I just want to make that clear.
Yeah, and basically what happened there was we identified syndicate activity renting flats in close proximity to these stadiums, which can then be used as brothels. But in terms of statistics, that which a lot of people thought the extent of the problem is going to be, and the amount of cases actually being reported subsequent to the World Cup, there was a huge difference in that. Much less that has been reported than we actually expected. So,
Thora, do you want to chip in there?
Yes, I do. We were involved in a major child protection program over the World Cup 2010, where with one of the retail stores in 477 stores countrywide, we had a safe place where children could go to. And one of the big problems is that every one of the police, or the majority of police, were employed in watching the parks, in services, and the games. So there was nobody doing any work and visiting brothels and doing this. So, once again, as Marcel said, we know that afterwards a few cases came through. Maybe we dealt with 5 reports during that time, but there just wasn't anybody in the police force actually doing the work there because they were deployed elsewhere.
And just a footnote, and I agree, Thora, and that just confirms the subversive nature of this crime. We often have these preconceived ideas in how this crime manifests in everyday society. So once again, if we truly understand the multi-layered complexities, our approach should change according to that. So, yeah.
Have you picked up, Luvuyo, that these traffickers also use electronic means like the internet and those to draw people to come to a country?
Of course, hence in the current legislation, we've got a specific section that specifically deals with the issue of service providers or internet service providers, which it requires of them to exercise due diligence to ensure that their sites are not used for trafficking purposes.
So how prevalent is that, using websites? Beatri?
Well, if we can just take the example of the world leader now in the juju cases, it again was then confirmed that these your syndicates are really well-resourced, they are intelligence-driven, and they are super up-to-date with the latest technological developments, because that's what they use to get in touch with all the networks that are often all over the world being placed. So technology is an absolute necessity for them, and almost that is what makes them stay ahead of some of our law enforcement and our efforts to track them down. It's also common that we have already discovered that things like trafficking for sex tourism is being done through webcam on electronic media, where a person is then asked to do some sexual activities in front of his computer on the webcam. It's then captured, and the person is paid for that. The person doesn't even have to leave their house sometimes, because they are kept in a sort of a sex den, where they are then televised and set in front of the TV camera, and the trafficker, or the client then dictates what type of service he wants to be exposed, or what the client should expose her or himself in front of the webcam. So technology is an absolute vital part.
There's another thing I want to talk about, excuse me, Professor, something else I want to talk about. There was this famous case in Durban, something we alluded to this in our introduction. There was this famous case in Durban where people were brought into Durban and body parts were taken from them without them knowing about it. Is that a big thing in this trafficking?
Well, you get a situation where people are actually trafficked for the removal of body parts. The only case in South Africa that I heard of that was the one in Durban, but the current legislation, it penalizes any trafficking for removal of body parts.
We can explore that when we come back from the break. If you want to join us, please call us on 714-6918 or 6919 or tweet us on Rights Recourse. I'll be back after the break. Body parts. Welcome back. If you'd like to be part of our discussion, you can still call us on 011-714-6918 or 6919 or tweet us on Rights Recourse. Luvuyo, there is also this issue. Many people are saying the fines as per the Act look rather ridiculous. Should somebody found guilty of this offence not be locked up and the key thrown away?
In terms of this current legislation, it prescribes that if you are convicted for trafficking, it's life imprisonment or as a fine which does not exceed 100 million. So that is a hefty penalty.
The stories we've heard and what we've seen happening around us now, these guys make a lot of money. They can raise 100 million.
No, they do, but the court would actually look at the circumstances of the case. Invariably, the psychological scars of the victim will come into play. Therefore, I would imagine that the court would not be inclined in terms of giving, a fine. They would be inclined in terms of giving, the prison term.
The people who do the research, Marcel and Professor Kruger down in Bloemfontein, are the laws that we have enough to prevent something like this?
Maybe we can ask that to Professor Kruger.
Professor Kruger, you can go ahead. He's asking that you go ahead first.
Yes. Okay. I think it is true what Luvuyo has said, is that we at the moment have the fragmented parts of legislation. Although I must say it has been used quite well by certain very experienced prosecutors, since we had life sentences, 20-year imprisonment, 23-year imprisonment, and so forth. But the new legislation, we should actually compare to the international standards in the Palermo Protocol. And if we do that, we see that we are mostly in compliance with the international standards, and even broader. So when this act comes into place and into force, we will really be able to have a good piece of legislation especially in comparison with some of the Eastern countries in Asia, what legislation they have. So we will have a good piece of legislation. The thing will just be is, can we implement it? And for that, we will really need expertise in various areas, and I think we are moving towards that. Because apart from just being traffickers, the whole network of traffickers, the whole ring, from the person who organizes it, that finances the whole scenario, the person who go and spot whether there are people that will fit the market, because always there will have to be a market before there can be human trafficking, because that is where the trafficker spots where he can find the specific people that are needed for this market. So the whole circle that I wanted to say, the ring of traffickers, can be prosecuted in terms of our new legislation, and I think we can be very proud of this legislation. But the proof of the pudding would be, can we implement it properly?
Is this kind of crime related to drug trafficking?
Well, the drug trafficking, definitely one of that. I mean, we're talking about an organized crime, and organized crime networks doesn't just always specialize in one crime. So you've got dedicated transportation routes. You've got people in positions of authority, specialists in various sectors. So if the demand is women, if it's rhino horn, if it's drugs, it often is intertwined, and so definitely relate. If you're talking about drugs, we often see drugs in many cases, serves as the glue, which almost keeps this enterprise going, where where a physiological need for a substance is created, and victims are then manipulated. They're paid with a street drug, so definitely intertwined.
Well, Professor Kruger mentioned something there, guys, saying the proof of the pudding is in implementing the laws properly that we have. I want to go to Thora in Durban. Thora, what can be done to kill this thing? I know you might not kill it altogether, but what can be done to persuade people to dissuade people not to get involved in something like this?
Well, the first thing we have to do is we have to educate, and that is educate right through. We are looking at the government of solving all the problems. I do know that within KwaZulu-Natal, the human trafficking is in the LO program. I think each and every one of us have a responsibility, wherever possible, to promote anti-trafficking. So I would think that awareness is one of the biggest things, and that is the role of every single one of us. Whilst we are all waiting for the government to do anything, we're not going to be getting very far.
Well, I was told, my mother told me, my first teacher is herself and my father. Shouldn't we go back to the basics, those kind of basics? Because surely you can't be told by a stranger, I'm going to take you there and there, and you don't ask questions.
I personally believe it begins in the family. I think relationships are so important. We just recently, priorly, we spoke about social networking, and I often stress this point. Family, the mother, the father, often leave, the YouTube and the Google to disciple their children. And I personally believe, social networking is going to offer your child a stone and a serpent, whereas you, as the parent, is supposed to give the steak and the cake. So I think parents are just not involved. I think, we're all busy, but I think we create those vulnerabilities, we create those cracks, and we cannot allow our children to fall through those cracks. So it definitely starts in the household with the basics. Yeah.
Well, when we come back, we'll go further into what can be done to dissuade those who are involved with trafficking, human trafficking, not to do so. It's in the human interest that they should not do so. Please, don't go away. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back, and thank you for staying with us here on Rights and Recourse. Thora wanted to say something, but Thora, I just want to start with Luvuyo again quickly, just to find out what are the relationships they have as the NPA with other African countries in combating this kind of thing.
Mr. Matias, there is an organization called Africa Prosecutors Association. The NPA is a treasurer of that organization, represented by Advocate Machokwe. That organization, we use that organization as a platform to ensure that we galvanize all the African countries to work with us in terms of combating trafficking in persons. We've now started by looking at Palermo as a benchmark and looking at their laws, whether they're in line with the Palermo Protocol.
Palermo in Italy.
Yeah, Palermo.
In Italy.
There's a protocol. That's the name of that protocol. It was signed in Italy. Palermo
protocol that was signed in Italy.
Yes.
Excuse my ignorance.
Yes. Now we're looking at rehabilitating their trafficking laws, aligning them and harmonizing with the Palermo protocol. So we're running that project. We work closely with Swaziland in particular, Mozambique. We've engaged, we've trained their prosecutors. They wanted to adopt our counter-trafficking initiatives, that is the task team model. We are busy with that kind of a project, so we're working closely with them. We do have protocols in terms of ensuring that we assist each other in the field of justice and legislative development.
We're now looking at solutions. Thora, you had something to say earlier?
You asked about how we can educate, and I felt that education was of prime importance. I know that in KwaZulu-Natal, after a recent meeting with them just last week, that they are taking human trafficking into their LO program. I think that each and every person must take personal responsibility. Marcel is saying it starts in the home, absolutely. And at a meeting in the office just recently, I said we should turn off TV during dinner time and sit around a table. And the response was, well, many of us don't have a dining room table. So I think that when we start putting these things and ideas into practice, we have to look and see what if people have. Some people may not have the media to be able to do that, but then they can look at the newspaper and in the personal column and just see what is happening there. So I would think educate, building family relationships and family values again is really important. I think each and every person should start learning more about human trafficking. The resources are there. And supporting NGOs like ourselves that are actually working to combat anti-human trafficking.
By the way, you are an organization, are you getting any support?
From the Department of Social Development, they sponsor our program.
Oh, thank you very much.
Otherwise, we'd like the government to support us. Yeah.
Let me go into what does the research tell us, Professor Kruger? What does the research tell us? What are the other means where this thing could be stopped in its tracks?
I think one should realize, as it's internationally accepted, that human trafficking should be addressed from the so-called 4 or 5 Ps approach, which means, first of all, to look and see if we can't prevent it. And that's what Thora was talking about, the awareness raising, the education. That's very important. If we can't prevent it, then we should look at protecting our victims. That's the second P, which is very challenging. And then protecting and assisting them to get out of their trauma, to recover, and if possible, also to assist then the prosecution, which is the next P, to have successful prosecutions. And then that goes together with the prosecutions are the punishment. There should be stringent punishment, because that is, if you take the pocket, out of the money out of the pocket of your trafficker, then it's deterrent. The last P is the partnerships. And that is internationally or in a country and in every community. Because our first case in the Dos Santos case, the investigating officer informed me that it was because of one member of the public that saw something out of the ordinary and reported it. And that led to the freeing of the 3 girls and the life sentence being imposed. So this crime has to be looked at various angles, and it's easy to remember the 4 Ps approach, which means that a lot of role players, multidisciplinary, and every man in the street can play a role in it.
Marcel, you wanted to add something?
Well, I just wanted to touch on the issue of demand, because if there were no demand, this evil would not have happened. You know, and I just think about the role of men in society. Men start being men and pulling up their socks and being the protectors out there, you know, and asking ourselves, you know, some serious questions about the issue of demand, you know, the demand for sexual services. Pornography is just such a huge problem internationally, but also in our own country. And I think, you know, it's these kind of nuances which we often ignore without realizing that it plays a fundamental role in fueling demand and then also exploiting a vulnerability. So, yeah.
To chip in on what Marcel has alluded to, this current legislation has got a specific section that deals with those who are using the services of trafficked victims. It penalizes those. So I'm making a call out there to our to those who are using the services of trafficked victims, that they will be punished and they will be embarrassed. You know, invariably, they will be married, they've got girlfriends and wives. That section is specifically there. So they should refrain from engaging in those activities.
Thora, the question I forgot to ask you is, so the people who are with you now, from which parts of the world are they from? Are they from South Africa or are they from outside South Africa? Thora, yes. Thora, the people who are with you now at your place there, are they from South Africa or are they from outside South Africa?
I'd like to speak generally about that. And the women that have been through our shelter and through our program have come from Russia, from the East, quite a few from Bloemfontein, incidentally, so I know that Beatri's kept quite busy there. And and certainly from the UK and also from America, Russia, interestingly, and Ethiopia has also been. So it's very much across the international borders. But I must say that a lot have also come from Cape Town, just from one suburb to the other. And we know that it's also moving into the townships. So they're moving out of the central area with their brothels and nightclubs, and are finding their way into rural areas, or rather urban areas, residential areas.
What do you do for them? Do they just sit around, or what do you do for them?
There's a very, 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 very difficult program. You must remember that they've been controlled. They were told when to get up, when to eat. They were forced to have sex for so many times. They come to us in the shelter and they're told when they can get up, when they can eat, when they can sleep, when they can watch television. So they move from one control point into another control point. So we have to be able to put together a program that brings, first of all, healing and restoration. So with that, there is therapeutic, there's medical care, there's reference to legal care. And then, of course, there's all the skills that they can learn. You know, maybe some of them have never even been able to go shopping, so you have to teach them how to go shopping. You have to teach them health care. You also need to remember that many of them have had no health care. They have to deal with botched abortions or extreme burning, physical, broken bones. So, you know, we talk about the victims, but we also need to talk about the deep psychological needs. And so that's what we deal with in terms of our rehabilitation. And then finally, it's rehabilitating them, one, to go into the court process, but secondly, to be reintegrated back into their families. Maybe they're going back into their homes overseas. So it's very, very comprehensive. It's difficult work. You have to first build their trust. They don't trust anybody. So it's difficult, but it's so rewarding when we see somebody that moves from a victim into being victorious.
Well, let's take final words from you, Professor, down in Bloemfontein. A final word on this, Professor?
Sorry, yes, my final word is if somebody listens to this program, they want to know, so what can I do? So I would suggest is to go onto the internet and look at a South African organization or network which is called the National Freedom Network. There are numerous opportunities where you can get information, where you can get ideas of how to become involved in various ways, and also to jot down the hotline for trafficking. So if you have any questions about it, or you are suspicious, or you perhaps are in a situation where you need help, please contact. The contact number is 0800 555 999. Please call them, and we will be really try to be as helpful as possible. And thank you very much for the program and for everybody who has done their part in combating this crime.
Final word for you, Marcel.
Yeah, I'd like to reflect on the words of Martin Luther King. You know, he says, I cannot be what I'm supposed to be if you are not who you are supposed to be. And he refers this as the interrelated structure of reality. So, I mean, just what affects you affects me. So for us not to have this mentality that this is where I stay, I don't care what's happening next door to me, it's all important, all matters. Yeah.
Luvuyo.
What I can simply say is that our trafficking in person task teams in all the 9 provinces, they're very active. We will cascade the services down to regional and local level, where we'll have our champions to ensure that we focus on the prevention pillar, that is to educate our people so that we have an informed society to curb this scourge.
Well, quickly, Professor, can you give us that number again? 0800 555
555 999.
0800 555 999. To close our program, I thought it appropriate to end with a quote from a poem by the late Maya Angelou, aptly called The Cage Bird. I quote the last stanza. But a cage bird stands on the grave, his shadow shouts on a nightmare scream. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The cage bird sings with a fear of full thrill, of things unknown but longed for still. And his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the cage birds sing for freedom. This has been Right and Recourse. This program is repeated at 10 tonight and at 5 on Monday morning. From all of us here in the studio, thanks to our guest, and have a good afternoon.